I'm Jer Stays, and welcome to Your Daily Detroit, your all-local podcast sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. On this Thursday, November 18th, 2021, two big stories, and we're focusing on the city of Detroit. First, the city has a new food truck ordinance. Detroit has lacked guidelines in this area for about a decade, limiting that industry. Cities around the world have been using this as a way to grow not only entrepreneurship, but access to food in underserved areas of town. District 6 Councilmember Raquel Casteñeda Lopez, the author of the ordinance, joins us to talk about it. And second, it looks like that plan to save the historic dairy cattle building at the State Fairgrounds and turn it into a transit center, well, it's in real jeopardy. We'll talk to Detroit's Chief Operating Officer Hakim Berry about what the mayor plans next, whichever way City Council votes on Tuesday, as well as D4 consultant and preservation supporter Francis Grunow. Let's jump into it. Food trucks first. Well, and a little transit center too. Councilmember Raquel Casteñeda Lopez, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your time. So, big news this week is that there is a new food truck ordinance in the city of Detroit. It's been a long time criticism that the city has not gone ahead as much as other places when it comes to allowing food trucks. But when you dive into this is a lot more comprehensive than, say, a few more tacos, and has a lot more behind it. Can you talk about kind of why you put this forward and in this kind of comprehensive manner that also talks about food access?
Yeah, so really this was a request from community members, both community members who were asking, well, how do we get access to just food, fresh produce, et cetera, because in my neighborhood, for example, I don't have any grocery stores. I have to go to the gas station or the liquor store just to pick up some quick snack. And so folks were very interested in trying to increase food access citywide. And so if you are familiar with Food Lab Detroit, they do amazing work on supporting small entrepreneurs and are trying to address the food deserts that exist in our city. The other piece and main component is really around support our small businesses and supporting this very hyper-local economy. Food truck owners are really diverse, and many of them are people of color or women or immigrant backgrounds within the LGBTQ community. So it's a very diverse industry. And so wanting to support those small entrepreneurs and clean up some of the confusion that currently exists about how and where food trucks can operate in the city while making it safe for folks to eat from food trucks. So ensuring that there's fire inspections and a licensing process and proper inspections with the health department so that folks know when they go to eat at the food truck, they're going to be safe eating that food.
And so into the details of this a bit, this includes some guidelines for how far it needs to be away from other places, for paying for parking, things like that. Can you talk about some of the things that help kind of refine and sharpen this ordinance so that it's clear for folks?
Currently, there's not actually a license in place for food truck owners. Most folks go and get their license from the state and then just, pop up usually at private events. So currently people often say, oh, well, we have tons of food trucks. They can only operate on private property. So, for example, on Wayne State's campus or downtown in some of the parks that the Downtown Development Partnership manages right now, or in private parking lots that you see on the West Verner corridor. So what this does is creates an official licensing process that sets standards around inspections, as I mentioned before, standards around the distance, so they can be 200 feet from brick and mortar and from the arena area citywide. It sets hours of operations and really just clarifies, again, those procedures. So now food trucks can operate in public spaces citywide, in commercial areas. So they can't just pull up on a little quiet residential street in front of someone's house and start selling food. It has to be a commercial corridor, and there has to be sufficient sidewalk width to allow for pedestrian and folks in a wheelchair to get by. So there's guidelines, but say, for example, on Fort Street in the Boynton Schaefer community in 48217, a food truck could pull up and start vending there to help increase access to food. The parking rates and such, the ordinance won't officially go into effect until April 30th, and that's to allow the departments to implement and build up the infrastructures they need. So deciding the parking rate, deciding on the specific areas in the downtown area and the cultural district, et cetera, et cetera. So those behind the scenes administrative things that need to happen are going to happen over the next several months. And then on April 30th, people can officially begin applying for licenses. But it's about streamlining the process, making it clear what food trucks have to do to comply, and making it clear on the city's end and on how to enforce. So, this will be generating new tax revenue for the city, because currently, again, folks don't have to pull a license, and so they're not paying city taxes. Now they'll have to pull a license and pay into the city's infrastructure as a whole. And it, again, makes it a clearer, easier process for food trucks to be able to pop up and really go throughout the city in the public spaces.
And, the idea of a grocery food truck seems really enticing to me. Is that something you've seen some examples of in Southwest or that you'd like to see encouraged?
Well, I think around the country, if I've been lucky to travel and visit, places like San Francisco or Chicago or New York, of course, and there's food trucks they can specialize in anything. So from what we see in Detroit, from beignets to mac and cheese to smoothies. And what you see informally happening is that you have folks who do sell fresh fruits and fresh vegetables that people can just pick, or they're cut and people can just go and grab those. And that is common in the Southwest Detroit neighborhood currently in the city of Detroit. But we have seen other places, and actually if people travel outside of the US, in many other countries, that's currently how some things are done, is that the fruit vendor will come down the street in the mornings, or the vegetable vendor will come down the street in the morning, and people go get their fresh fruits and vegetables so they don't have to go to the market or wait for the bus to go and pick up things. And it's just really beautiful to see, because it really fosters more activity and such on the streets and in the neighborhood to contribute to the sense of community in those areas.
I mean, it's something that I would love to see here in the North End. I mean, it'd be super cool to be able to know that the grocery truck is coming by, or the produce truck, and be able to pick up those things fresh. And it brings it right to their doors. And it really gets over a barrier around transportation and such that's in the city right now.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the other component. And I mean, people, if you don't have a grocery store, you have to wait on the bus line for some time to get to a grocery store. And not all of our bus lines are designed in a way to take people to grocery stores, so you may have to get on multiple buses. So this is really about access for Detroiters across the city, whether you have reliable transportation or not. And I think, again, when you make things accessible in communities, that really creates and builds up the sense of community and makes them more independent. So folks don't have to drive to another location. They can get all their basic needs met within their own neighborhoods.
Well, speaking of transportation, I think that's a great segue. And this kind of came up in conversations with listeners over the last, day or so. There's news that there's been kind of a delay when it comes to the transit center, the State Fair Transit Center plans. You raised some objections around environmental issues. What are your objections with that, or questions that you have? And how does that compare to the possibility of the new center? Because if you look at the timelines, it's kind of like there's an A and a B, and depending on when this gets approved, it depends on which one's going to get built.
I think the neighborhood has more questions as it relates to not just the transit center, but the surrounding facilities. And that's really more my concerns. I think you can't just look at the transit center in isolation. You need to look at it as part of this overall hub that's being created in that community. And so as it relates to issues of air quality and really environmental justice, we definitely need a new transit center and wholeheartedly support a new transit center being built. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're protecting those transit riders and really, regular everyday workers going to work at the Amazon facility, or people just driving in the vicinity from the pollution that's caused by these massive semi-trucks that rely on diesel fuel. And so not having some type of physical separations to prevent accidents, traffic accidents, but having designated lanes for the trucks separate from the buses and from regular traffic, that is dangerous and can prevent issues when we see backups and things. And the other piece is protecting through buffering, through some type of air quality monitoring, et cetera, to make sure that we're not endangering people's public health when they're waiting at this transit center. So, I mean, it's a complicated issue. There's multiple layers to it. Yes, we need a new transit center, but I would say not at the cost of people's public health and not endangering folks from a safety standpoint.
So for you, it's a consideration of not just the buses, but also the semi-truck traffic from Amazon, putting those two together so close to each other.
It's the bus traffic. It's people walking. A lot of our people walk to the bus stop, or ride their bicycles to the bus stop. So it's the whole range of motorized and non-motorized transit and how folks will get there, and the impact of industry on the transit center and folks trying to get there.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time and getting into both of those issues. And also, congratulations. You've pretty much made it to the end of your term.
Yes, almost. Our last session is next Tuesday.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
In the last day or so, listeners have been asking to learn more about what's happening with that transit center project at the State Fairgrounds, especially in light of the recent Detroit City Council vote to delay approval on the $18 million historic renovation of the 52,000 square foot plus facility. It include a climate-controlled waiting area, room for DDOT and smart buses, as well as transit-related offices in the old dairy cattle building. The Coliseum would be turned into a portico and a park, giving some green space. Media reports have said that some Palmer Park residents do not want the bus fumes near them. And as you just heard, there were environmental issues raised around truck and bus traffic. So I got on the phone with Hakim Berry, the City of Detroit's Chief Operating Officer, for his take and where the administration stands. Hakim, welcome to Daily Detroit.
All right. Glad to be here.
I'm working on getting more information on the State Fair transit proposals and where we stand coming up to Council's vote on Tuesday. The most recent one, which includes a renovation and reimagining of the dairy cattle building and a park. A couple of council members have raised environmental concerns about it, whether it's for riders or traffic or fumes into Palmer Park. Do you see a material difference between that and the first plan that was talked about, $7 million plan, which would be new construction from that perspective?
Well, our goal from the administration is to give something nice to the 30,000 passengers that come through, and then a great facility for the drivers. So the $7 million rendering and drawing was going to be a great asset for those riders and the drivers. When we took that plan out, the community gave us some feedback, and the feedback was to try and preserve those two buildings as much as possible. And our team took that feedback back and worked with our design team and came up with an alternative solution. And yes, it is a little bit more money, but we think this is something that could work and satisfy many of the people there using adaptive use of those historical buildings there. So we've satisfied a lot of the questions we had initially when the project came through with the environmental studies. Those were done over a course of months to ensure that additional truck traffic and the routing there for the Amazon project wouldn't be something detrimental to the environment and to the residents in that area. The buses have always been in the area, so there's not an increase in traffic that will be coming through that area, so we don't see an issue there, but we're willing to continue to work with council as much as we can to answer any questions and satisfy any concerns. But we do have a project that we have to get on and keep on task there.
Yeah, and since we're in an audio medium, just to be clear, both of these proposals, they would actually move where the buses idle farther away from the Palmer Park neighborhood, right?
That is absolutely correct. It moves north of where that actually northeast, and so it's closer to the 8 Mile on the other side of the shopping center.
So if council votes no on the dairy cattle building project on Tuesday, what's next? I mean, does this bounce to the next session? Do you move forward? What happens next from the administration's point of view?
We have an approved project, so we will move back to Plan A, and that is to demolish the buildings and begin construction on the original design. So that's already approved and ready to go.
So basically, it's one or the other at this point.
Yes, that's basically where we're at. We're at the end of it. So it's the desire of the people and the council, and we'll just move forward.
What would be your timeline in both of those situations, whether there's the demolishing or the rehabilitation? Is there really a difference in the construction timeline, anything like that?
No, our promise to the riders is to have a facility built by, I think, September of 22. So we're anxious and ready to get started.
Well, Hakim Berry, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you.
Glad to be here.
So it's clear if it's a no from City Council on Tuesday, the historic buildings in question at the State Fairgrounds will meet the wrecking ball fully and completely. The administration wants a transit center to happen before next winter. There's a lot of demand for it too. But it's been months of work to put together this compromise. For that perspective, consultant for D4, Francis Grunow. Welcome to Daily Detroit. Well, welcome back. You've been on before, sir.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about what's at hand. I think a lot of people may have thought that everything is settled with the State Fairgrounds site and the transit center, but that does not seem to be the case. What's going on from your perspective?
Yeah, well, the question has come back to council. There's a proposal by the mayor's office to preserve the dairy cattle building, one of 3 National Register structures in that portion of the site. And the proposal is to transform the dairy cattle building into a transit center for DDOT riders and maybe others, depending on plans going forward. So it's very exciting that a portion of the site will incorporate historic structures. The other structure that was considered with this feasibility study, 2 of the 3 were considered as part of a feasibility study that council approved, was the Coliseum. And unfortunately, that building is largely going to be demolished under this plan. So in order to accommodate the transformation of the dairy cattle building, a lot of the Coliseum is going away in favor of a green space that will be created, as well as a portion of the Coliseum's portico at the southern end. That's kind of the plan on the table, and council basically punted that question for a week for their final session next week, where they have to decide one way or another whether to go for it.
Now, I've talked with a member of council about this. I know one thing is environmental concerns, but as I understand it, there starts to be concerns about how this project's actually going to come together if it does not get approved on Tuesday.
Yeah, apparently it's a sort of one building or no buildings situation, unfortunately, but we are happy to see a lot of work that's been put into a thoughtful consideration for the dairy cattle building. We're really sad to see the Coliseum not being included in that consideration. The environmental concerns are issues that, will be ongoing if the project is completed, assuming that the vote is in favor, because the nature of what goes on within the State Fairgrounds will be changing quite dramatically. There'll be a lot of buses going through, a lot of large Amazon 18-wheeler vehicles going and coming. So environmental concerns from traffic and mitigating that is a concern. I think there are other things that could be done going forward in terms of greening the green space and buffering people from it to make it more enjoyable, lively, have a space that offers quality of life, programming that space. And so I think there's a real opportunity to do more thinking about that part of the project going forward if, in fact, council votes yes.
And just so that listeners know real quick before I let you go, what are some of the accommodations that the dairy cattle building will be able to give for transit riders?
So the dairy cattle building is a structure from the 1920s on the sort of northern edge of the site. It's in this cluster of historic properties, including the Coliseum and the agricultural building. And the dairy cattle building is built at grade. It's largely open, so you could, basically, if you open up one of the walls, you could drive a bus through it, like they're proposing to do. So it will be a large sheltered facility. It will also have this adjacent green space where the Coliseum stood. And inside there will be public accommodation, at least as what's been presented. I think ticketing, seating, rest areas, Wi-Fi, also potentially commercial spaces for folks to engage with, whether you're waiting or as a destination. I think some of that remains to be seen. There's also, at least in one of the renderings I saw, an area of the site's history that will highlight the State Fairgrounds history over time in some capacity. So that is also something so these are all things that have been already presented and proposed with the new deal. As we go forward, it would be great to see more of these environmental concerns, more green and renewable ideas. Could the facility incorporate solar panel to make it, completely carbon neutral? Could there be these buffering ideas? There's a lot of opportunity there, especially with some of the federal monies, possibly. So that would be something to make this, I think, even better as an outcome.
Well, what are your 2 cents? Are you excited about the food truck ordinance? Would you like to save the dairy cattle building? Or is it not a priority for you? Or something completely different? Jared@dailydetroit.com would love to hear from you. And with that, we are done for today. Thanks to Cheyenne Nocerini for pinch hitting on a little bit of editing today. We're supported by our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit. All local coverage requires resources and community support of all kinds, so thank you ahead of time. Tomorrow for Friday Fun, Devin O'Reilly joins me to talk about some developments around town and all the Thanksgiving things. I'm Jer Stays. Thanks so much for listening. Take care of each other, and I'll see you around Detroit.